This is Steve Sepidesky, and we're here at Google Hangout with Jim Brown and Leo Honecutt. Let me just first introduce Jim Brown, and Jim, if you don't mind, you can introduce Leo, and then I've got a question for both, at least for Jim. And Jim is former Secretary of State, former Louisiana Senator, and also an insurance commissioner. I'm proud to have him as one of the columnists for BayouBuzz.com. Jim, let me just ask you a question. That is that you have known Governor Edwards for quite a while, and as senator and also as elected official in a statewide capacity. And I'm just wondering, what is the major reason why people just are endeared to the governor, whether or not they love him or hate him?
Well, that's a good point, because there is no middle ground with Edwin Edwards, and you've got to give that guy credit, whether you like him or not. He's had tremendous staying power, probably more so than any other politician in the history of this state. I was elected in 1971 to the state senate from a rural district up in northeast Louisiana, a little town of Faraday, and Edwin Edwards was elected the same time. And it was a lot of new legislators coming in, so I was asked to be a floor leader, which means that a lot of the legislation, not just directly from the governor, but from various other agencies, would come to me to handle their legislation, from the highway department, from the welfare department, from the economic development department. And so I had a chance to work closely with the governor during those years. And I've got to tell you this, and all these things are laid out so well in Leo Honecutt's book. But Steve, back in the 70s, a lot of your younger listeners and viewers of this website can't remember this. But that was the one of the best times in Louisiana if you ask the news media, if you ask legislators across the board. That's when a lot of things got done. We had a new constitution. We really updated so many laws. At that time, we had the strongest open meetings law and Public Records Act in the country. We got the selection of architects for state work out of politics and done on a professional basis by architects and engineers. So I could go on and on and on with you. And it wasn't just Edwin Edwards. It was a number of key legislators, many of which your viewers won't remember. People like Nat Kiefer out of New Orleans, and I go down the list, Claude Duval out of Houma, Billy Brown out of Monroe. Really bright legislators, lawyers, all who went on to be judges and doing other very important things. So it wasn't just Edwards. It was a great time in Louisiana. The economy was good. The price of oil and gas was rising. Everything fell into place. Then when he came back in the 80s, there was a downtime with the economy, and he got indicted at the time over a hospital scandal, found innocent, and so it was a little rougher then. And then he came back in the 90s again, the only governor in the history of the state that served 20 years. So I think today, I would say, and I want Leo's comment on this, that his popularity is based on a variety of things, and he's very popular today, quite frankly, even after serving 8.5 years in prison. I think there's a yearning for more enjoyable times to a lot of people when their income was better and life was a little better back in the 70s, quite frankly, that Edwards gets the credit of. You know, we all are nostalgic, and politicians always look better after some years. You know, George Bush is starting to look pretty good right now, you know, where he was way down before. So in any event, I think there's some nostalgia there that has a factor on it. He's very colorful. People like to be amused here in this state. We love our football. We love our cookouts, and we love our racy politicians. And I think it's a gumbo of a variety of factors that has made him so popular. I think a lot of the distrust in government on both the federal level and the state level has caused Edwards to look better in the scheme of things. So you put all those together, and you see that point. And again, this is captured so well. Now, I know you've got listeners all over the country that are going to view this. Leo Honecutt has a long tradition of being in the media. He's been on television, radio. He's done a number of things in his life. But he wrote a fascinating novel that caught my attention, and it's called Over the Edge. You can find it on my website for my publishing company at thelisbonpress.com or jimbrownla.com. or LeoHoneycutt.com. And the novel was great, and I thought Leo might be the guy to write this Edwin Edwards book. We talked about it. There was a number of Edwards' friends who felt like he didn't get a fair shake when it came to his overall picture. So Leo agreed to take on the daunting task, spending 4 years of his life writing the definitive biography of Edwin Edwards. Now, Leo, I've kind of given you a little introduction. I wish you'd pick up on that and tell our viewers here about your getting into this. And we don't have a lot of time. Do it just 3 or 4 minutes, if you will. But if you will, give a view of what what you got into and how confusing it was initially, and how you ended up affecting your life, and how you just absorbed the life of Edwin Edwards for about 4 years.
You know, since you got in contact with me back in 2004, at which time I told you I really wasn't interested in doing the book on Edwin Edwards because I didn't like him. There were a lot of things about him I just didn't like, and actually Jim badgered me into at least going over and talking to him. He said, you know, it sure is nice to know that you're still an objective reporter. So, you know, with that kind of dig, I was left with nothing but to go over and talk to him. I hadn't talked to Edwards in about 10 years. And then to go see him in prison was kind of a different feel by itself. But over the years, it took about maybe the first full year before I finally realized that he wasn't opening up that much to me, and it's because he just had to develop a certain sense of trust. But one of the main things I realized is that, you know, he had been governor for 4 terms for 16 years, and some say de facto governor for about 25 years. And because he had played that role for so long of being in power and being at the top, he just couldn't break loose of that. I mean, he just he was so used to that character was him. I don't think he remembered who Edwin Washington Edwards was, not the one from Marksville, not the one from Crowley. I think he had completely forgotten that life, and I was trying to get him to reach back to remember those formative years and what he thought might have brought him to the forefront of Louisiana politics, ironically starting in the day of Huey P. Long. Of course, Huey Long died when he was about 6 years old, and he was not really into politics obviously then, but then he wound up being in politics for 50 years, starting about 1953. And there's nothing in his background. There's nothing in the Edwards background in Marksville, being a sharecropper, being on a sharecropper farm, being pretty much abject, poverty-stricken, that would say that this guy would have wound up being Louisiana's 4-term governor and set records everywhere, but he did. And so, you know, that's the kind of country that we're in. Anybody can do anything at any time. And I think that's part of his popularity, is that people admire somebody who raises themselves up from no place and become somebody.